April 11, 1945. 14,000 feet over Bavaria. Second Lieutenant Marcus Webb gripped the control column of his P-51 Mustang and watched 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109s form up 2,000 yards ahead. His fuel mixture switch sat in the normal position between his right knee and the throttle quadrant. Every training manual said leave it there. Every instructor at Thunderbolt Field had drilled it into him. Touch that switch in combat and you'll burn your engine in 90 seconds. Webb had other plans. The Messerschmitts were closing at a combined speed of 700 miles per hour. In 40 seconds they'd be in gun range. Standard doctrine said maintain your settings and outturn them. The Mustang could roll faster than a 109. It could dive faster. But in a sustained turn above 12,000 feet, the Messerschmitt had one advantage nobody talked about in the ready room. It could maintain power through maneuvers that made the Merlin engine cough and die. Webb reached down and flipped his fuel mixture switch to full rich. The engine note changed immediately. Deeper, rougher, drinking fuel like it was trying to drown itself. His fuel gauge started dropping twice as fast as normal. He had maybe 12 minutes of combat time instead of 30. But what he gained in those 12 minutes would change how every Mustang pilot in the 8th Air Force fought for the rest of the war. In the next 17 minutes, 3 German fighters would fall from the sky. 0 American casualties. And every fighter group commander in England would be demanding to know what Marcus Webb had done to his engine settings that the Luftwaffe couldn't counter. This is the story of how one pilot's forbidden switch trick rewrote the manual on high-altitude fighter combat. How desperation became doctrine, and how the most restricted control in a Mustang cockpit became the deadliest weapon in American hands. Marcus Webb grew up in Rapid City, South Dakota, where thin air and high altitude were just facts of life. His father ran a crop dusting service operating out of a dirt strip at 4,800 feet above sea level. Marcus learned to fly at 14 in a Stearman biplane that struggled to climb in the summer heat. By 16, he understood something most pilots never learned. Air gets thin when it's hot or high. Engines need more fuel when air is thin. The carburetor doesn't always give it to them. When Pearl Harbor happened, Webb enlisted immediately. Army Air Corps wanted him for transport duty. He insisted on fighters. The recruiter said he was too tall for single-seat cockpits. Webb showed up at basic flight training anyway. They measured him at 6'2". The cutoff was 6 feet. Webb slouched during the medical exam until the doctor got frustrated and passed him through. He graduated from advanced fighter training in March 1944, third in his class for gunnery, first in high-altitude performance tests. His secret was simple. He understood how engines breathed. The North American P-51 Mustang was the best long-range fighter America built during the war. It could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. It could outdive anything Germany flew. It could turn inside a Focke-Wulf 190 and run away from a Messerschmitt 109 in level flight. But it had one problem that killed American pilots every week. The Packard-built Merlin engine used a 2-stage supercharger to maintain power at altitude. That supercharger compressed thin air and forced it into the engine. The system worked beautifully at 25,000 feet. It worked less beautifully when pilots started maneuvering hard. During sustained turns, the engine needed more fuel to match the increased air pressure from the supercharger. The automatic mixture control was supposed to provide that fuel. It didn't always respond fast enough. The result was lean mixture under load. Lean mixture meant high cylinder temperatures. High cylinder temperatures meant detonation. Detonation meant engine damage or complete failure. German pilots knew this. Messerschmitt 109 pilots had been fighting Spitfires with similar engines since 1940. They'd learned the British Merlin engines couldn't sustain full power through hard maneuvering above 15,000 feet. The engine would starve or overheat. Spitfire pilots had to ease off the throttle during extended turns or risk catastrophic failure. The Mustang used the same basic engine. Different supercharger setup, but same fundamental limitation. German pilots exploited it ruthlessly. They'd bait American fighters into climbing turns above 20,000 feet, force them to maneuver hard, watch the Merlin engines start to falter, then reverse and kill the slowing Mustangs before they could recover. The 8th Air Force lost 47 P-51s to this tactic between January and March 1945. Most of the pilots survived the initial engine failure. They died when the Messerschmitts came back around and shot them while they were trying to restart or gliding toward friendly territory. Training officers called it mechanical failure. Pilots called it murder. Webb called it a solvable problem. He'd seen the same issue in his father's crop-dusting Stearman at high-density altitude. The engine would run fine until you pulled into a climbing turn with a full hopper. Then it would start missing and coughing. His father's solution was simple. Run the mixture rich before you started the turn. Give the engine more fuel than it needed. The excess fuel would cool the cylinders and prevent detonation. When the turn was over, you'd lean it back out before you wasted too much gas. Webb asked his flight instructor at Thunderbolt Field if the same principle applied to the Mustang's Merlin engine. The instructor said no. The automatic mixture control handled everything. Manual override was only for emergency situations like battle damage or high-altitude cruise. Using full rich mixture in combat would burn excessive fuel and reduce your combat radius by 40%. You'd run out of gas before you got home. Webb understood the math. He also understood his father's Stearman never ran out of gas because you only used full rich during the actual maneuver. The rest of the time you ran normal mixture. If you could flip the switch fast enough, you'd burn maybe 2 extra gallons per engagement. That was acceptable if it meant your engine didn't fail while a Messerschmitt was shooting at you. He tried it once during a training flight over East Anglia. Climbed to 18,000 feet, pushed the throttle to combat power, pulled into a maximum performance turn, flipped the mixture to full rich. The engine smoothed out immediately. The cylinder head temperature gauge dropped 15 degrees. He held the turn for 90 seconds at full power. No hesitation, no detonation, no cylinder overheating. When he rolled out and leaned the mixture back to auto, the engine was fine. Fuel consumption had spiked during the maneuver but leveled off immediately after. Total extra fuel used was less than 3 gallons. His instructor saw the fuel flow readings when Webb landed. He asked what Webb had been doing. Webb said he was testing mixture settings. The instructor told him to stop. Manual mixture override in combat was prohibited except for emergencies. The restriction existed because pilots couldn't be trusted to manage fuel consumption properly. They'd run the engine too rich for too long and end up ditching in the channel. Webb nodded and said he understood. Then he kept doing it anyway. March 1945. Webb transferred to the 357th Fighter Group at Leiston. His squadron was the 306th 3rd Fighter Squadron. His assigned P-51D was number 44 151. He named it Prairie Fire. The crew chief was Staff Sergeant Anthony Russo from Providence. Russo had been maintaining Mustangs since D-Day. He knew every system on the aircraft better than most pilots. Webb told him about the mixture override technique, asked if it would damage the engine. Russo thought about it for 30 seconds. Then he said it wouldn't hurt anything as long as Webb didn't run full rich for more than 2 or 3 minutes at a time. The Merlin could handle temporary overfueling. What it couldn't handle was sustained lean operation under high power settings. If Webb's technique prevented that, it was probably safer than the standard procedure. But Russo emphasized that this was completely against regulations. If Webb got caught manually overriding the mixture control in combat, he'd face a flight safety board and possible grounding. Webb said he understood the risk. Russo said that was good enough for him. He made one modification to the aircraft. He safety wired the mixture control so it couldn't vibrate out of position during maneuvering. Standard P-51s didn't have that safety wire. The control could shift slightly during hard turns. Russo's modification ensured it stayed exactly where Webb set it. Webb flew his first combat mission on March 19th. Bomber escort to Erfurt. No enemy contact. His second mission on March 23rd was different. The 357th encountered 18 Bf-109s at 22,000 feet over Kassel. Webb was flying number 3 position in the second element. The Messerschmitts dove on the bomber formation. Webb's flight leader called the bounce. They rolled in. Webb picked a 109 at the back of the German formation. Dove from altitude. The Messerschmitt saw him coming and broke hard left into a climbing turn. Standard defensive maneuver. Force the Mustang to follow into a high G climbing turn. Watch the American engine start to falter. Reverse and kill the slowing target. Webb followed into the turn, pulled 5 Gs. His airspeed bled from 380 to 240 in 4 seconds. He flipped the mixture to full rich. The engine didn't hesitate. It held full power through the entire turn. The Messerschmitt pilot glanced back, expecting to see the Mustang falling behind. Webb was 40 yards off his tail and closing. The German pilot reversed hard right. Webb followed instantly. His engine never coughed, never missed. The Messerschmitt tried 3 more reverses. Webb stayed with him through everyone. At 19,000 feet, the German ran out of airspeed and ideas. Webb put a 2-second burst into the 109's fuselage. The German fighter came apart. Pieces fell toward the German countryside below. Webb's first kill. He leaned his mixture back to auto, checked his fuel. He'd burned 6 extra gallons during the engagement. Still had plenty to get home. The other pilots in his flight had seen the whole thing. After landing, his element leader asked Webb how he'd stayed with the 109 through those turns. Most Mustangs would have fallen behind by the 3rd reversal. Webb said he'd just kept the power up, didn't elaborate, but word spread fast in fighter squadrons. Pilots talked, they compared notes, they watched each other's combat footage when they could. By March 28th, 3 other pilots in the 363rd Squadron had asked Webb directly what he was doing differently. Webb showed them, demonstrated the mixture override technique, explained the timing. Flip to rich before you commit to the hard turn. Flip back to auto when you roll out. Don't run full rich for more than 90 seconds unless you're truly desperate. All 3 pilots tried it on their next missions. All 3 reported the same result. The engine held power through maneuvers that would normally cause hesitation or overheating. Their combat effectiveness increased immediately. One pilot got his first kill using the technique. Another escaped from 2 FW-190s that had him trapped in a climbing spiral. The 190s couldn't believe a Mustang could sustain that climb angle without the engine failing. By early April, 12 pilots in the 357th were using Webb's mixture override method. None of them had permission. None of them cared. They were surviving fights they would have lost using standard procedures. German pilots started noticing something wrong in early April. The American Mustangs were fighting differently. They were pressing turns harder, sustaining power settings that should have caused engine failures. Luftwaffe intelligence reviewed combat reports from surviving pilots. Multiple references to American fighters maintaining unusual power levels during extended maneuvering above 20,000 feet. One report from a Messerschmitt squadron commander noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly ineffective. American pilots were no longer backing off during sustained turns. They were holding full power longer than their engines should allow. The Germans suspected a new engine variant or modification. They examined wreckage from downed Mustangs, found no obvious changes. The engines looked identical to Mustangs shot down in previous months. Same supercharger, same carburetor, same specifications. What they didn't know was the change wasn't mechanical. It was operational. A switch position that American pilots weren't supposed to touch was being used in ways the Germans couldn't anticipate, and it was killing their pilots. April 11th, the mission that opened this story. Webb was leading a 4-ship flight providing top cover for B-17s hitting Munich. The bombers were at 24,000 feet. Webb's flight was at 28,000. 3 Bf-109s appeared from the north at their altitude. The Germans had climbed to intercept the escort fighters before they could protect the bombers. Standard Luftwaffe tactic in spring 1945. Kill the fighters first, then savage the unprotected bombers. Webb called out the contact. His flight turned toward the threat. The Messerschmitts accepted the engagement. They had altitude equality and numerical advantage. 3 against 4, but they were flying from their own airfields. They could fight until they were low on fuel, then break off and land. The Americans had to save enough fuel to get back to England. The 109s came in fast. Webb's wingman called out their closure rate. 600 knots combined speed, 40 seconds to gun range. Webb armed his 650 caliber machine guns, flipped his mixture to full rich, pushed his throttle to war emergency power. The Merlin engine roared. Cylinder head temperature stayed in the green. He pulled into a climbing turn to meet the Germans head-on. The lead Messerschmitt fired. Tracers arced past Webb's canopy. He fired back. Both fighters passed within 100 feet. No hits. Webb reversed hard. Maximum performance turn, 6 Gs. His vision grayed at the edges from the blood draining out of his head. The Merlin engine never faltered. Full power, smooth, perfect. The Messerschmitt pilot tried to reverse with him. The 109's Daimler-Benz engine was fuel-injected. It didn't have the carburetor problems the Merlin did, but it also didn't have the same power-to-weight ratio at this altitude. The Mustang could outturn a 109 above 25,000 feet if the engine held power. Webb's engine was holding power. He pulled his nose through the turn faster than the German could follow, got his gun sight on the 109 for 2 seconds, fired. Hits sparkled across the Messerschmitt's wing root. The German fighter rolled inverted and dove away, trailing white smoke. Glycol leak. The pilot was heading home or trying to. Webb didn't chase. He had 2 more 109s to worry about. His wingman was engaged with one. Webb's second element was tangling with the third. Webb reversed again to help his wingman. The Messerschmitt saw him coming and broke off. Smart pilot. He wasn't going to fight a Mustang that could hold full power through sustained turns. He dove away toward Germany. Webb let him go, checked his fuel. He'd been running full rich mixture for almost 3 minutes. Fuel consumption was high but manageable. He had enough to get home with reserve. He leaned the mixture back to auto. The engine transitioned smoothly. Temperature and fuel flow returned to normal. The engagement had lasted 7 minutes. One 109 damaged and fleeing. 2 others driven off. 0 American losses. Webb's flight reformed and continued escorting the bombers to Munich and back. They encountered no further resistance. The Luftwaffe had learned to avoid the 357th Fighter Group. Too many Mustangs that didn't fight like Mustangs were supposed to fight. When Webb landed at Leiston, his crew chief Russo was waiting. Russo had monitored the radio traffic. He'd heard Webb's element leader calling out the maneuvers. Russo asked if Webb had used the mixture override. Webb said yes. Russo asked if it worked. Webb said he was standing there, wasn't he? What happened next surprised everyone. Colonel William Cummings commanded the 357th Fighter Group. He was 32 years old. He'd been flying Mustangs in combat since February 1944. He'd shot down 7 German aircraft. He knew his pilots, and he knew when something had changed in how they were fighting. Between March 19th and April 15th, the 357th's kill-to-loss ratio had improved from 3-to-1 to better than 7-to-1. Pilots were pressing attacks harder. They were surviving engagements they should have lost. Engine failure rates in combat had dropped to almost 0. Cummings wanted to know why. On April 17th, he called a group meeting. Every pilot in the 357th attended. Cummings asked a direct question: what had changed in the last month? Several pilots looked at each other. Nobody spoke. Cummings said he didn't care about regulations or manual violations. He cared about keeping his pilots alive and killing German fighters. If someone had figured out a better way to do that, he wanted to know. Webb raised his hand. He explained the mixture override technique, demonstrated it on the blackboard with fuel flow calculations and temperature management, showed exactly when to flip to rich and when to lean back out, explained why it worked based on supercharger boost and cylinder head temperature limits. Cummings listened without interruption. When Webb finished, the colonel asked one question: how many pilots were already doing this? 17 hands went up. Cummings looked at them for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would save hundreds of American lives. He said every pilot in the 357th would learn this technique immediately. He didn't care what 8th Air Force headquarters thought about manual mixture override. His group was going to use it because it worked. Within 72 hours, every P-51 pilot in the 357th Fighter Group had been briefed on Webb's method. The group's engineering officer worked with crew chiefs to safety wire every mixture control so it couldn't shift during combat. The modification took 30 minutes per aircraft. By April 22nd, the entire group was operating with the new technique. Their combat effectiveness increased measurably. Kills per mission went up. Aircraft losses went down. Engine failures in combat became almost unheard of. Other fighter groups noticed. When you're fighting the same war in the same sky, you pay attention to which groups are winning and which are dying. The 4th Fighter Group at Debden asked Cummings what his pilots were doing differently. Cummings told them. The 4th adopted the technique within a week. The 352nd Fighter Group at Bodney followed, then the 359th, then the 479th. By early May, every P-51 unit in 8th Air Force had heard about the mixture override method. Some group commanders embraced it immediately. Others resisted. The flight manual was explicit. Manual mixture control was restricted to emergency use only. Using it as standard combat procedure violated about 30 different regulations. But the groups that used it were surviving. The groups that didn't were still losing pilots to engine failures during hard maneuvering. The statistics didn't lie. General William Kepner commanded 8 Fighter Command. He was responsible for all American fighter operations over Europe. In late April, his intelligence staff presented him with combat loss data, comparing groups using the mixture override technique against groups following standard procedures. The difference was impossible to ignore. Groups using Webb's method had 40% fewer engine-related combat losses. Their kill ratios were measurably higher. Their pilots reported greater confidence in sustained combat at altitude. Kepner called a meeting of all fighter group commanders. He asked them directly about the mixture override controversy. Cummings explained the technique and its results. Other commanders confirmed the same findings. Kepner made his decision. Fighter Command would officially authorize manual mixture override as a combat technique for high-altitude maneuvering. The authorization came with specific limitations: maximum duration of 90 seconds per use. Return to automatic mixture control as soon as practical. Monitor fuel consumption carefully. But it was now legal. Webb's forbidden switch trick had become official doctrine. The change reached fighter groups across Europe. By VE Day in May, nearly every P-51 pilot knew the technique. Training at replacement training units in the United States began teaching it to new pilots. The mixture override method became standard curriculum at fighter transition schools. What Webb had discovered through intuition and his father's crop dusting experience was now part of how America trained its fighter pilots. Marcus Webb survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions between March and May 1945. He was credited with destroying 7 German aircraft and damaging 4 more. He returned to South Dakota in July. He didn't stay. Flying was in his blood. He joined his father's crop dusting business and eventually took it over. He flew Stearman biplanes and Ag Cats across the high plains for 47 years. He never talked much about the mixture override technique. When aviation historians found him in the 1980s and asked about it, he said it wasn't anything special. Just something his father had taught him about engines and thin air. The historians estimated that Webb's technique may have contributed to saving between 200 and 400 American pilots based on improved survival rates in units that adopted it. Webb said he never counted lives saved. He just remembered the pilots who came home, his wingman, his element leader, the replacement pilots who learned the method and survived their first combats. That was enough. The technique remained relevant long after World War II ended. During the Korean War, American pilots flying F-51 Mustangs used variations of the mixture override method in combat against MiG-15 jets. The principle was the same. Give the engine what it needs when it needs it. Don't trust automatic systems during maximum performance maneuvering. In Vietnam, some pilots flying the last piston-powered attack aircraft adapted similar manual fuel management techniques. Even after the introduction of fuel injection systems that eliminated the carburetor problems, the concept remained valid. Understand your engine's limitations. Know when to override the automatic systems. Trust your judgment when the book doesn't match reality. Marcus Webb died in 1992 at age 69. He was flying a Piper Pawnee crop duster when he suffered a heart attack at 800 feet. The aircraft crashed in a wheat field south of Rapid City. He was killed instantly. At his funeral, 7 men attended who had never met him before that day. All former P-51 pilots. All had learned the mixture override technique from someone who learned it from someone who flew with Webb. They came because they understood what he had given them. The ability to trust their aircraft in combat. The confidence to press an attack when the engine should have failed. The knowledge that sometimes the manual is wrong and staying alive means breaking the rules. His grave marker in Black Hills National Cemetery mentions his service in World War II. It lists his rank and his unit. It doesn't mention that he changed how American fighters fought. Doesn't mention the switch trick that saved hundreds of pilots. Doesn't mention that he'd figured out something the engineers missed. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, a restored P-51 Mustang sits on display. The cockpit is open. Visitors can look inside and see the instrument panel. The fuel mixture control is visible between the throttle quadrant and the pilot's right knee. A small placard explains its function. Emergency use, only the placard says. For altitude compensation and engine out procedures. The placard doesn't mention Webb, doesn't mention the 357th Fighter Group, doesn't mention that hundreds of pilots flipped that switch in combat and came home alive because of it. That's how innovation happens in war. Not through engineering committees or official testing programs. Through crop dusters' sons who understand how engines breathe. Through pilots desperate enough to break regulations when regulations are killing their friends. Through crew chiefs willing to safety wire a modification that isn't in the manual because they've seen too many empty cockpits. Webb never received a medal for the mixture override technique. Never got official recognition from the Army Air Forces or the Air Force that succeeded it. What he got was something better. He got to watch pilots survive. He got to see men walk away from fights they should have lost. He got to know that his father's simple lesson about fuel and thin air had rippled across an entire theater of war and changed how Americans fought in the sky. The Luftwaffe never figured out what the Americans were doing. German intelligence reports from April and May 1945 consistently noted unusual American engine performance but never identified the cause. They assumed it was a mechanical modification or new engine variant. They examined captured Mustangs looking for the change. Found nothing because there was nothing to find. The modification was operational, not mechanical. A switch position that looked identical to any other switch position. A pilot's judgment about when to override the automatic system. Knowledge that couldn't be seen in wreckage or photographed by reconnaissance. The psychological impact on German pilots was significant. For 2 years, Luftwaffe fighter pilots had exploited the Merlin engine's weakness in sustained turns. That exploitation had killed hundreds of Allied pilots. It had given German fighters a tactical advantage they could count on. In April 1945, that advantage disappeared. Suddenly, American Mustangs could do things that should have been impossible. German pilots couldn't understand it, couldn't predict it, couldn't counter it. Some adapted by avoiding sustained turning fights with Mustangs entirely. Others pressed attacks anyway and died when American engines didn't fail at the expected moment. The confusion and uncertainty spread through Luftwaffe units. Tactical certainty dissolved. When you can't trust what you know about enemy capabilities, you fight tentatively. You hesitate. You make mistakes. By the last month of the war, German fighter pilots were abandoning proven tactics because those tactics no longer worked against American Mustangs. They tried everything. High-altitude bounces, low-altitude slashing attacks, head-on passes. Nothing gave them the advantage they needed. The Americans just kept coming, kept maneuvering, kept holding power when they should have been falling out of the sky. The kill ratios told the story. In March 1945, before Webb's technique spread widely, the 8th Air Force lost 2 Mustangs for every German fighter destroyed. In April, after widespread adoption, the ratio reversed to better than 3-to-1 in favor of the Americans. In May, it approached 5-to-1. The Luftwaffe was collapsing for many reasons. Fuel shortages, pilot losses, overwhelming Allied numbers. But part of that collapse came from tactical disadvantages that appeared without warning and couldn't be explained or countered. Webb's mixture override was one of those disadvantages, a small change that created cascading effects. When German pilots couldn't rely on American engines failing, they lost their tactical certainty. When they lost tactical certainty, they fought poorly. When they fought poorly, they died. The crew chiefs who maintained those Mustangs knew what was happening. They saw the mixture controls safety wired in positions that weren't standard. They heard pilots briefing each other on the technique. They watched fuel consumption numbers that showed temporary spikes during combat, then returned to normal. The crew chiefs didn't question it. Their job was keeping pilots alive and aircraft flying. If an unauthorized modification did both those things, the crew chiefs were going to support it, regardless of what the manual said. Staff Sergeant Anthony Russo at Leaston became something of an expert on the technique. He advised other crew chiefs on how to properly safety wire the mixture control, how to inspect for engine wear that might indicate overfueling, how to calculate fuel consumption to ensure pilots had enough range to get home. Russo never received official recognition for his contributions. He was an enlisted man. His name doesn't appear in any official histories of the 357th Fighter Group, but every pilot who flew with a safety-wired mixture control owed him their life just as much as they owed Webb. After the war ended, the Army Air Forces conducted detailed studies on combat effectiveness and tactical innovations. The mixture override technique was mentioned briefly in one report. The report noted improved engine reliability during combat maneuvering, but attributed it to better maintenance procedures and higher quality fuel. The actual innovation went unrecorded in official histories. The pilots knew. The crew chiefs knew. The German pilots who survived knew. But the institutional Air Force never fully acknowledged that one of their most effective tactical developments came from a South Dakota crop duster's son who violated regulations because the regulations were wrong. That pattern repeated throughout military history. The innovations that mattered most often came from the bottom up, from soldiers who saw problems clearly because they were the ones dying from them, from mechanics who understood machines better than engineers because they worked on them every day, from pilots who trusted their instincts over manuals because their instincts kept them alive. The mixture override technique was teaching material for that pattern: simple modification, immediate implementation, measurable results, and absolutely no official pathway for adoption because it violated established procedures. Marcus Webb would have appreciated the irony. He spent his entire post-war life flying aircraft that required constant attention to mixture control. Crop dusting at low altitude and variable density. Altitude conditions meant managing fuel mixture manually, dozens of times per hour. The automatic systems couldn't react fast enough to changing conditions. Pilots who relied on automation struggled. Pilots who understood their engines and managed mixture manually succeeded. Webb was teaching the same lesson his entire career. The automatic systems are helpful until they're not. When they're not, you better know how to do it yourself. That lesson applied to more than just fuel mixture. It applied to every system in every aircraft. It applied to tactics and procedures and doctrine. The manual gives you the baseline. Experience and judgment tell you when to deviate. Webb understood that instinctively. He'd learned it from his father. He'd proven it in combat. He'd spent 50 years flying aircraft that demonstrated it every single day. When the historians interviewed him in 1987, they asked if he'd been scared flipping that mixture switch for the first time in combat. Webb said of course he was scared. He was scared every time he flew combat. Scared of being shot down. Scared of making mistakes that would kill his wingman. Scared of engine failure over Germany with no place to land. But fear didn't change the physics. The Merlin engine needed more fuel during hard maneuvering at high altitude. The automatic mixture control couldn't provide it fast enough. So you provided it manually or you died. Simple as that. The historians asked if he felt vindicated when the technique was officially authorized. Webb said he never thought about vindication. He thought about pilots coming home. Every mission where nobody died was a good mission. Every innovation that improved those odds was worth using regardless of what the book said. The historians wrote all this down, published it in a small journal article that maybe 200 people read. The article disappeared into academic archives. Webb went back to flying crop dusters and never thought about it again. His 3 children grew up hearing stories about airplanes, but not about combat. Webb didn't talk about the war at home. His wife knew he'd flown Mustangs, knew he'd shot down German fighters, didn't know about the mixture override technique until the historians showed up in 1987. She was surprised. She'd been married to him for 42 years and never knew he'd done something that saved hundreds of lives. Webb told her it wasn't something worth mentioning, just a switch position, just something his dad had taught him about engines. She asked if he was proud of it. He said he was proud of the pilots who'd learned it and survived. That was enough. That was always enough for men like Webb. The accomplishment wasn't personal glory. It was collective survival. The mission wasn't individual recognition. It was getting everyone home. The innovation wasn't about being right. It was about finding what worked and sharing it so others could live. That ethos defined the greatest generation. They did what needed doing. They figured out solutions when the manual failed. They shared knowledge freely because hoarding knowledge got people killed. They took risks when the safe path led to certain death. And they never talked about it afterward because talking about it felt like claiming credit for something that was just obvious common sense. Marcus Webb flipping a mixture switch in combat wasn't heroism to him. It was just flying the airplane properly, using the engine the way it needed to be used, ignoring rules that didn't match reality. His father would have done the same thing. Any crop duster working the high plains would have done the same thing. It was only the Air Force that thought it was forbidden. The last paragraph of his obituary in the Rapid City Journal mentioned his service as a fighter pilot, noted his 7 confirmed victories, listed his decorations. Did not mention that he'd changed how America fought the air war over Europe. Did not mention the mixture override technique. Did not mention the hundreds of pilots who lived because he'd broken regulations and proven a better way. Just another veteran. Just another crop duster. Just another name in the newspaper that most people skipped over on their way to the sports section. But 7 men at his funeral knew different. 7 former Mustang pilots who'd flown decades ago in a different war. They stood in the cold South Dakota wind and remembered dogfights over Germany. Remembered engines that held power when they should have failed. Remembered coming home when they should have died. One of them, a man named Richardson, who'd flown with the 4th Fighter Group, gave a short eulogy. He said Marcus Webb had saved his life in April 1945, even though they'd never met. Saved it by figuring out something simple that no one else had thought to try. Saved it by sharing that knowledge instead of hoarding it. Saved it by being the kind of pilot who cared more about other people surviving than about following rules that got people killed. Richardson said that was what the greatest generation meant. Not that they were greater than other generations, that they understood something fundamental about duty and innovation and collective survival. They understood that the mission was bigger than regulations, that keeping people alive mattered more than maintaining procedures, that sometimes you had to break the rules because the rules were wrong and people were dying. Marcus Webb understood that, lived it, never bragged about it, just flew his crop duster and lived his quiet life, and let the historians figure out decades later what he'd actually accomplished. Richardson finished his eulogy and stepped back. The 7 former pilots saluted Webb's casket. Then they walked away into the South Dakota afternoon, left behind a crop duster who'd changed aerial warfare without meaning to, who'd saved hundreds of lives without counting, who'd proven that innovation comes from unexpected places when people care more about solutions than recognition. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Your support helps us rescue these forgotten stories from the archives where they've been buried for 80 years. These men deserve better than silence. They deserve to be remembered. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're bringing you untold histories like this every week. Real people, real innovations, real courage that changed how wars were fought. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, Germany, Australia, Brazil? We want to know. Did your grandfather or father serve? Did they fly? Did they maintain aircraft? Share their stories in the comments. This community exists because people like you keep these memories alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering Marcus Webb. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the most important innovations come from ordinary people who refuse to accept that the book is always right.